Every supercar promises the same thing: speed, status, the feeling that you finally made it. Most of them deliver on that promise. This list is not about those cars. This is about the ones that wore the badge, carried the price tag, and still let their owners down. One of these cars got called the worst car ever tested by a major automotive magazine. One of them ended up in lawsuits because buyers didn't get the car they put a deposit down on. These are not our opinions. These are the words of the people who actually own them and the critics who actually drove them. These are the 10 worst supercars ever produced, and the reasons are worse than you think. If you want the honest story behind the world's most expensive mistakes, hit subscribe right now, because that is exactly what we do here every single week. So why do supercars fail? It's rarely the top speed. It's rarely the horsepower number on the spec sheet. It's almost always what happens after the car leaves the showroom. It's the transmission that can't handle stop-and-go traffic. It's the electrical system that fails at 40,000 miles. It's the promise made to the first buyers that quietly got broken before the car ever hit production. We dug through owner reviews, period road tests, and reliability data to find the 10 cars that talked the biggest game and delivered the smallest results. Let's start at number 10. Number 10. The Cadillac XLR-V. In 2004, Cadillac wanted to prove they could build a real rival to the Mercedes SL. The XLR-V was their answer. It used a supercharged Northstar V8, making 443 horsepower. It sat on a modified Corvette platform, and it had a retractable hardtop that folded away in about 20 seconds. On paper, this was America's answer to the European luxury sports coupe. Magnetic ride control, a Bose sound system, real presence on the road. Here's what actually happened. Reviewers drove it and kept coming back to the same conclusion. It felt like a dressed-up Corvette wearing a much more expensive suit, and at that price, buyers expected it to feel like something entirely its own. The driving experience never separated itself enough from a car costing half as much. Then you get to ownership. That retractable hardtop, the same feature that made the car feel special in the showroom, turned into one of the most common complaint threads on owner forums. Motors failing, seals leaking, repair bills that made owners question the whole purchase. The resale numbers tell the rest of the story. A car that started around $100,000 now regularly turns up for a fraction of that on used car lots. And it isn't because these cars became rare collector pieces. It's because the market figured out what the reviewers already knew. The verdict on the XLR-V is simple. It looked like a supercar, it was priced like a supercar, and it drove like a really nice Corvette with an identity crisis. That gap between the price and the experience is exactly why it lands on this list. Number 9. The Aston Martin Virage. Aston Martin already had the DB9 covering grand touring duties and the DBS covering the more aggressive end of the lineup. In 2011, they introduced the Virage to sit in between them. That was the entire pitch. A car to fill a gap that most buyers didn't know existed. It used Aston's 6.0-liter V12. It had the styling Aston Martins are known for, and it drove well enough. The problem is that reviewers kept asking the same question the moment they got behind the wheel. What does this car do that the DB9 doesn't already do better for less money, or the DBS doesn't already do better for the same money? Nobody had a satisfying answer, including Aston Martin. Sales reflected that confusion, and the Virage quietly disappeared from the lineup within 2 years. Then, there's the ownership side, which is where a lot of Astons from this era get their reputation. Owners report electrical gremlins, an infotainment system that felt outdated the day it launched, and the kind of small, expensive niggles that come standard with British engineering from this period. None of these problems were unique to the Virage. What made the Virage different is that buyers were paying full supercar money for a car that Aston Martin themselves couldn't clearly justify. The verdict here isn't that the Virage was a disaster to drive. It's that it was a solution to a problem nobody had. Priced like it solved something important. When even the manufacturer can't tell you why their own car exists, that's a real problem. Number 8. The Maserati GranTurismo. Few cars on this list look better than the GranTurismo. Pininfarina designed the body. Ferrari built the 4.7-liter V8 under the hood. It had the kind of presence that turns heads at a gas station without even trying. For years, it was the car people pointed to as proof that Italian design still meant something. Here's what owners actually experienced once the warranty ran out. Electrical gremlins showed up constantly, from window regulators to infotainment glitches that dealers struggled to permanently fix. The ZF automatic transmission, while smooth when new, developed complaints about hesitation and rough shifts as the cars aged. Interior trim that looked stunning on day one started creaking and wearing faster than buyers expected for the price point. Reliability surveys have consistently ranked the GranTurismo near the bottom for cars in its class, and owner forums are full of stories about frequent dealer visits for problems that never seem to fully resolve. The frustrating part is that none of this takes away from how the car looks or sounds. That Ferrari-built V8 makes one of the best noises of any V8 ever put in a road car. But a supercar that spends more time in the service bay than on the road stops being a supercar and starts being an expensive lesson. The verdict on the GranTurismo is that it's gorgeous in photos, gorgeous at idle, and a lot less gorgeous once you're sitting in your mechanic's waiting room for the third time this year. Number 7. The Porsche 911 Turbo, specifically the recall-heavy generations. This one surprises people. Porsche built its entire reputation on the idea that you can drive a 911 to the track, back home, and to work the next morning without thinking twice. That reputation is exactly why certain generations of the Turbo landing on reliability studies sting so much. Reliability data from multiple studies has flagged specific 911 generations with recall counts and repair frequencies that rival far less prestigious brands. Owners who bought into the myth of bulletproof German engineering instead found themselves dealing with PDK transmission issues. And older flat-six owners are still haunted by IMS bearing failure, a well-documented problem that could take out an entire engine with almost no warning. When a car marketed on reliability starts showing up next to Italian exotics in failure rate studies, that's not a small footnote. That's the entire selling point falling apart. To be clear, this isn't about how the 911 drives. It remains one of the best handling cars ever built, and most 911 owners will defend it to the end. The issue here is expectation versus reality. People paid supercar money expecting Honda-level dependability, and for certain years, they didn't get it. The verdict is that the 911 earned its reputation fair and square over decades, which makes it worse when a specific generation breaks that trust. Owners who bought in during those years learned that badge loyalty doesn't fix a failed bearing. Number 6. The Lamborghini Murciélago. The Murciélago is one of the most recognizable supercars ever made. Scissor doors, a naturally aspirated V12, and styling that still looks aggressive 2 decades later. It replaced the Diablo and became the poster car for an entire generation of car enthusiasts. Here's the part that doesn't make it onto the poster. Early Murciélagos came with Lamborghini's E-Gear transmission, a single-clutch automated manual that sounded great on paper and was miserable in practice. Owners describe it as jerky at low speeds, slow to shift compared to anything with a modern dual-clutch box, and rough enough in stop-and-go traffic that some owners avoided driving the car in city conditions entirely. That's a real problem for a car that costs this much money. On top of the transmission complaints, running costs on the Murciélago are steep, even by exotic car standards, with clutch wear being a frequent and expensive repair for owners who actually drive their cars instead of just parking them in a garage. None of this stops the Murciélago from being an icon. It absolutely is one. But there's a difference between the car everyone dreams about and the car actual owners deal with day to day, and the E-Gear transmission is exactly where that gap shows up. The verdict on the Murciélago is that it earned its spot on 1,000,000 bedroom walls fair and square. But if you ask the people who actually drove one in daily traffic, you'll hear a very different story than the one on the poster. Number 5. The Mercedes AMG GT. Mercedes built the AMG GT to go head-to-head with the Porsche 911. And on the surface, it does a lot right. Front mid-engine layout, a snarling twin-turbo V8, styling aggressive enough to make a 911 look conservative by comparison. It's fast, it's loud, and it photographs beautifully. The problem shows up in the recall data. One report found the AMG GT racked up around 18 recalls in just 7 years on the market, a number that puts it near the top of the list for least reliable cars in its class. Owners have cited recurring electrical issues, along with practical complaints about visibility and everyday usability that come with the extreme proportions. when you're spending six figures on a car that's supposed to compete with one of the most dependable performance cars ever built, and instead, you're dealing with recall notices on a regular basis. That gap between expectation and reality becomes the whole story. This is a car that absolutely delivers on excitement. Nobody complains about how it sounds or how it feels under hard acceleration. The complaints start the moment the car needs anything fixed, which for a lot of owners has been more often than they signed up for. The verdict on the AMG GT is that it's gorgeous, it's quick, and it seems to have an allergy to staying out of the service department. For a car built to compete with the most reliable performance car on the planet, that's not a small miss. Number 4, the Panther 6. If you've never heard of this one, that's part of the point. In the late 1970s, a small British company decided the way to build the ultimate supercar was to add 2 extra wheels. The Panther 6 rolled on 6 wheels total, 4 up front for extra grip and braking, powered by a twin-turbo V8 borrowed from a Cadillac Eldorado. It looked like something out of a Bond film, and in fact, one was actually used in promotional material alongside the franchise. Here's the reality. Only 2 of these were ever built, and there's a good reason for that. The car was massively impractical, absurdly wide, difficult to service, and built with the kind of quality control you'd expect from a tiny operation trying to reinvent the wheel. Literally, without the budget to properly test any of it. It wasn't fast enough to justify the outlandish engineering, and it wasn't refined enough to be usable as an actual car. It existed almost entirely as a design exercise, a way to generate headlines rather than a genuine attempt at building something people could drive and enjoy. The Panther 6 gets remembered today mostly as a novelty, a strange footnote in automotive history that people bring up, because 6 wheels sounds impressive until you ask what it actually accomplished. The verdict on the Panther 6 is that more wheels never meant more car. It just meant more problems, and a price tag to match a machine that never delivered on a single one of its own promises. Number 3, the Jaguar XJ220. This is one of the most infamous broken promises in automotive history, and it's worth slowing down to get the full story right, because it's worse than most people remember. When Jaguar first showed the XJ220 concept, it came with all-wheel drive and a V12 engine, and it was billed as the car that would claim the title of fastest production car in the world. Buyers lined up, deposits were paid, and we're talking about serious money, based entirely on that concept car. Then, production reality hit. Jaguar switched to a twin-turbo V6, dropped the all-wheel drive system entirely, and delivered a car that was fundamentally different from the one buyers had committed 6 figures toward. This wasn't a minor spec change. This was buyers expecting one car and receiving another, and it led to real lawsuits from customers who felt, understandably, that they'd been sold something under false pretenses. Some buyers refused delivery entirely. Beyond the trust issue, actually owning an XJ220 came with its own headaches. The car was enormous, wider than most garages could comfortably fit, expensive to service, with turbo lag that made it far less usable than the number suggested. It did briefly hold a top speed record, so in a narrow sense, it delivered on part of the original promise. But for the people who backed this car early, based on a completely different set of specifications, that record didn't mean much. The verdict on the XJ220 is that it was the fastest car in the world for a brief window, and one of the most significant broken promises in supercar history at the exact same time. Both things are true, and that's exactly why it sits at number 3. Number 2, the DeLorean DMC-12. Everyone knows this car because of a movie. Almost nobody remembers what it was actually like to drive, and that's a shame, because the real story is far less exciting than the time travel plot. The stainless steel body and gull-wing doors made the DMC-12 look like it drove in from the future. Underneath that futuristic shell sat a French-built PRV V6, making roughly 130 horsepower, in a car that weighed more than its shape suggested. Period road tests from Road and Track and other outlets found the acceleration genuinely disappointing for a car with this kind of styling and this kind of price tag. It wasn't slow in an embarrassing way, but it was slow in a way that completely undercut the image the car was selling. You don't build a car that looks like a spaceship and then give it performance that a mid-sized sedan could match. Add to that a rushed production timeline, well-documented quality control problems on early cars, and a company that collapsed into financial scandal before it ever had a chance to fix its reputation. and you get a car whose entire legacy rests on a single movie franchise rather than anything the car actually achieved on the road. The verdict on the DMC-12 is blunt. It looks like it's from the future and drives like it's stuck in traffic behind a delivery van. Without the movie, this car is a forgotten footnote, and that tells you everything about how it actually performed once real drivers got behind the wheel. Number 1. The Vector M12. This is the car that owns the worst reputation on this entire list, and it earned every bit of it. Vector built its name in the 1980s on wild, angular American exotics with big performance claims attached. By the time the M12 arrived in the late 1990s, the company needed something to compete directly with Lamborghini, and their solution was more complicated and more dishonest than most buyers realized. The M12 was built using a chassis and drivetrain sourced from the Lamborghini Diablo, wrapped in Vector's own body. This wasn't a car developed independently to rival the Diablo. It was, in practice, a rebodied Diablo without Lamborghini's assembly standards, without Lamborghini's decades of engineering refinement, and without the brand equity that actually justified the Diablo's price. Contemporary reviews were brutal. Auto Week reportedly called it the worst car ever tested, a headline that followed this car for the rest of its existence. Build quality complaints piled up immediately, with panel gaps, interior fit issues, and a general sense that this was a car rushed to market to chase a name rather than built to actually compete. Owners and reviewers at the time struggled to even describe what this car was supposed to be. It wasn't a true Vector in the tradition of the company's earlier wild designs. It wasn't a Diablo because it lacked everything that made the Diablo worth its price. It existed in an identity crisis of its own making, wearing a supercar body over someone else's engineering, and somehow managing to be worse than the car it was copying. The verdict on the Vector M12 is the simplest one on this entire list. When one of the most respected automotive magazines in the country calls your car the worst one they have ever tested, there isn't much left to argue. It earned the number 1 spot, and it earned it honestly. So there you have it. 10 cars that all wore the supercar badge and all failed to back it up in one way or another. Some failed on reliability. Some failed on broken promises to the buyers who trusted them first. One failed so completely that it became a punchline in its own era. Here's the thing worth remembering. A supercar isn't just a spec sheet or a badge on the hood. It's a promise made to the person writing the check. And every car on this list broke that promise in a different way. If you actually own one of these, or you've got a story about one that we didn't cover, drop it in the comments below. We read every single one, and some of our best videos have come directly from what owners tell us in that comment section. If you want more honest breakdowns like this one, the real numbers, the real flaws, and the real stories from people who actually lived with these cars, hit subscribe and stick around, because that's exactly what this channel does every single week. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.